In 2008, in the river gravel outside Juína, Brazil, artisan miners knelt in the shallows and sifted stones from the mud by hand, the way their fathers had, and their fathers before them. One small brown diamond, dull and unremarkable, went into a sack with hundreds of others bound for a local buyer. Nobody weighed it differently. Nobody looked twice. But sealed inside it, invisible to the eye and to every tool available on that riverbank, sat a fragment of blue-green mineral that had traveled up from nearly 400 miles beneath the surface of the Earth. By the time scientists finished studying that fragment, they would confirm something that sounds less like geology and more like scripture: that the interior of this planet holds water. Not a trickle. Not a pocket. An ocean, sealed inside solid rock, in a place no living thing has ever touched, ever will touch, or was ever meant to touch. Sit with that fact for a moment. It stops feeling like a discovery. It starts feeling like a memory returning to a species that forgot it. 23 centuries before that diamond left the ground, a text began circulating among Jewish scribes in the deserts east of the Mediterranean. It claimed to be the testimony of a man who never died, Enoch, seventh from Adam, carried up before the flood to walk among the chambers of the sky. In one of its strangest passages, it describes a place hidden beneath the foundations of the world. Chambers of water, sealed and kept apart from the waters above, waiting for a day of release that had not yet come. That leaves a question this film cannot answer quickly, and may not be able to answer at all. How does a document with no instruments, no submersibles, no seismographs, describe the architecture of something buried 400 miles down, centuries before anyone alive had a way to check? Hold that question. It will not let go of you. The text is called the Book of Enoch, and by the time the early church began settling its canon in the 4th century, the book had already fallen out of favor in most of the Mediterranean world. Councils excluded it. Copies stopped being made. For over 1,000 years, Western scholars knew Enoch only as a name quoted once, briefly, in the New Testament's Epistle of Jude, a citation from a work nobody in Europe could actually produce. Then, in 1773, the Scottish explorer James Bruce returned from Ethiopia carrying 3 manuscripts. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had done what almost no other tradition had done. It kept the book in its own liturgical language, Guiz, copied by hand across generation after generation of monks. Enoch had survived complete. In 1917, the biblical scholar R.H. Charles produced the English translation still cited by researchers today. Between 1947 and 1956, fragments of the same text, written in Aramaic and dated to the 2nd century before Christ, surfaced in caves above the Dead Sea. The manuscripts matched. The book was real, ancient, and considerably older than most historians had assumed. Decades earlier, the esotericist Manly P. Hall had already included Enoch among the handful of ancient cosmological systems he considered essential background for understanding Western esoteric thought. Mainstream biblical scholarship arrived at a similar respect for the text by a very different road. Through paleography and manuscript dating instead of esoteric tradition. Modern scholarship on the text, associated with researchers such as George Nicholsburg, situates its oldest section, known as the Book of the Watchers, in the 3rd century before Christ, making parts of it older than the final form of much of the Hebrew Bible. It was not fringe literature in its own era. It shaped early Christian angelology and appears to have circulated among the community that preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. It became apocryphal, excluded from Scripture, through decisions made centuries after it was written. Not because of any flaw discovered in the text itself. Inside it is a section scholars call the Book of Luminaries, a guided tour of the cosmos delivered to Enoch by an angel named Uriel. It maps the sun, the moon, the winds, the storehouses of the stars, the doors through which each season enters and leaves the sky. And it maps water. Not rain. Not rivers. Water kept in sealed chambers, above the sky and beneath the ground, deliberately separated, held apart by design. Waiting to be released only at the far edge of history, when the text says the two waters will finally be permitted to rejoin. Before this piece is finished, you will see the exact geological finding that lines up with that description. The year it happened. The institution that confirmed it. And why the scientists involved had no idea that a 2,000-year-old religious text had already claimed the same underground architecture. Enoch is not the only ancient source that places an ocean beneath the world. The Babylonians described Apsu, the freshwater abyss under the earth, and Tiamat, the churning waters above and around it, the raw material from which the Enuma Elish says the entire visible cosmos was carved. The Hebrew word Tehom, the deep named in the second verse of Genesis, comes from the same linguistic root. Ancient Egyptian cosmology had none, the primordial waters beneath and around all creation. Separated by language, geography, and centuries with no contact between them. These cultures kept arriving at the same architecture. A hidden sea, sealed beneath the visible world, older than the world itself. Mircea Eliade spent much of his career cataloging exactly this kind of repetition. Across his comparative studies of religion, he traced how cultures with no contact and no shared language kept returning to water beneath the world as a symbol of undifferentiated potential, the formless material that existed before creation gave it shape. To Eliade, the recurrence was not coincidence. It was evidence that certain images sit close enough to something universal in human experience that independent cultures rediscover them on their own. The way separate observers rediscover the same star. Carl Jung spent the final decades of his career studying patterns exactly like this one. He called them archetypes, images that surface independently across unconnected cultures because they originate somewhere deeper than culture, in what he named the collective unconscious. Water beneath the earth, in Jung's reading, was never really about geology. It was about the unconscious itself. The vast, dark reservoir beneath a mind that believes it already knows its own depths. But that brings the question back. Sharper than before. If these texts were only ever describing the psyche, only using buried water as a metaphor for what lies beneath human awareness, why does the metaphor now also happen to be geologically correct? In 2014, a research team led by geologist Pearson at the University of Alberta published its findings in the journal Nature. The diamond from Juína contained a mineral called ringwoodite, and the ringwoodite was carrying water. Not liquid water. Water bound directly into the crystal lattice, trapped since the mineral formed hundreds of kilometers down, sealed there for longer than human language has existed. The proportion measured in that single sample was staggering. If even a fraction of the surrounding mantle transition zone held the same ratio, the water locked in that one layer of the earth would outweigh every ocean on the surface combined. An ancient cosmology built sealed, deep water into its architecture of the world. A modern laboratory found sealed, deep water built into the actual architecture of the planet. One of those facts is myth. The other is peer-reviewed. No one has ever fully explained why they point at the same coordinates. Here is the thesis, stated plainly enough to repeat back to someone else. Ancient cosmologies were not failed science waiting patiently to be corrected. They were early attempts, built from intuition, observation, and inference, to describe the same physical reality that instruments would later measure directly. The Babylonians watched rivers rise from underground springs and volcanic fissures vent unknown material from below, and they built a theology around water hidden beneath the crust of the world. Centuries later, seismologists watched mantle rock melt in a pattern that only made sense if water was trapped inside it. Different tools. Different eras. Separated by 2,500 years. Same conclusion, arrived at from opposite directions. This is not a claim that Enoch's authors possessed some hidden scientific knowledge, a lost transmission smuggled down from a forgotten civilization. That version of the story is the one people prefer, because it is simpler than the truth. The truth is stranger, and it asks more of you, not less. It asks you to consider that careful observation, even without instruments, produces real knowledge, that a mind paying close enough attention to rivers, springs, earthquakes, and volcanic vents can arrive, by inference alone, at conclusions a laboratory would only be able to confirm 2,000 years later. Human beings, working only with observation, symbol, and inference, have an unsettling track record of describing the deep structure of reality long before they have any way to confirm it. Not with modern precision, but directionally, again and again. Correctly enough that the pattern itself demands an explanation. Elaine Pagels, writing on how early religious texts encode observation inside theology, has argued that ancient cosmological writing often functioned as a form of systematic description, dressed in the only language available at the time. The language of gods, chambers, and judgment. Enoch's chambers of water were not composed as poetry. They were composed as an accurate map of how the author believed the world was physically built. And in this one specific case, hundreds of years and one diamond later, the map turned out to match the territory. Stand at the edge of that thought for a moment. Somewhere beneath your feet right now, roughly 400 kilometers down, there is a layer of rock holding more water than every visible ocean combined, sealed, silent, and undisturbed since long before there was a species capable of writing the word ocean. A group of scribes in the Second Temple period had no conceivable way of knowing that detail. And yet they wrote it down anyway, and filed it under revelation, because revelation was the only category their world had for a truth that large. That is the part that should unsettle you. Not that ancient people believed in a hidden ocean, but that they were right. Go back to that riverbed outside Juína. To the miners standing in the mud, sorting stones by candlelight and instinct, with no idea that one crystal in their hands had carried 400 miles of rock and untold millions of years to deliver a message no one had asked it to carry. They were not looking for a hidden ocean. They were looking for a paycheck. And, without knowing it, they found both. That is how most true things get found. Sideways. By people who were not looking for them, hiding inside objects too small to seem important. Enoch's scribes wrote down what they believed was revelation, not geology. Pearson's team went hunting for evidence of mantle composition, not confirmation of a 2,000-year-old religious claim. Neither was trying to prove the other correct. And that is exactly why, when their conclusions landed on the same coordinates, it means something. No one in that laboratory in Alberta was thinking about scripture when the Ringwoodite came back positive for water. And no scribe copying Enoch onto Ethiopian parchment centuries ago was picturing a diamond mine in Brazil. Two searches, running in parallel across 2,000 years, arrived at the same buried architecture without either one knowing the other existed. That is not proof of anything supernatural. It may be something rarer than that. Proof that the oldest human instinct, the need to explain what lies beneath us, was aimed in the right direction from the very beginning. Maybe the oldest stories are not failed science, waiting around to be corrected. Maybe they are early instruments. Crude, symbolic, imprecise, pointed. Even so, at the same reality, our best laboratories have only now become capable of measuring directly. Maybe the deep has always been trying to tell someone what it holds, and for most of human history, the only people capable of listening were the ones willing to write it down as scripture, because the language of measurement did not exist yet. 400 kilometers beneath where you are sitting, there is an ocean that has never seen light, never touched air, and never once broken its own surface. It was there before Enoch dictated his chambers. It was there before Pearson opened his diamond. It will still be there long after both of their names have grown as old and as distant as the flood the ancient chroniclers tried, in their own broken language, to warn us about. Some oceans were never meant to be crossed, only remembered by whoever still had the language left to describe what they could not yet prove.